Chapter 4. Vesper. As lovely as the moon was, with its light dancing off of the water, it was nothing compared to the moon in his eyes. I tried not to look too obvious each time I stared at him, but I thought it odd that he kept in the contact from the club. Whatever the case, now that we had time to talk away from a noisy club and rather awkward situations, I was excited to get to know Sebastian. So, at the club, you said you had something to attend to. Do you work at a man? I asked, as I shifted to face him as if I was interviewing him. He flashed a small grin and shifted himself to face me like he was playing along with being an interviewee. I don't technically work there. I actually work for the person who owns it, so to speak. Sometimes he tasks me with making sure everything is in order there, he replied with a smile. I threw a curious look his way. So are the contacts this job requirement, or is that just a club thing? I asked, jokingly. He looked at me with his own glance of curiosity. The what? Oh, my eyes. I forget to remove them sometimes. Don't they make me look mysterious? He replied, with a playful tone of voice. It was relieving to catch my first glimpse of his sense of humor. I reached over to him and traced my fingers around his eyes. They do add a bit of mystery. They remind me of masquerade balls, concealing yourself behind your yellow eyes, I said, still tracing along them. Sebastian's expression changed to a brief look of worry, as if I said something hurtful. I pulled my hand away. Are you okay? Did I say something wrong? I asked, before he gently grabbed my hand. His touch sent the very same electrifying sensation that I felt when we were at Amman, causing the trembling to return. Sebastian closed his eyes and smiled warmly. You did not. Why don't I ask you some questions now? There's plenty of time to figure out my mystery later, he said with a bright grin. I pulled my hands away, excited to answer. Well, in the spirit of fairness, I think you should owe me an answer to the same question you asked me. It'll be fun, I replied, leaving Sebastian with an intrigued look on his face. Sebastian leaned backwards and lay down with his eyes fixated on mine as if in trance. Sebastian? I asked curiously. He blinked a few times before replying. Oh, sorry. Yes, that'll be much fun, he said. I looked at him expectantly as he seemed to be taking his time. What part of Denmark are you from? He asked, with a curious tilt in his posture. It struck me as a surprise he even knew. How did you know I'm from Denmark? I asked. He smiled at me with squinted eyes, which might be my favorite smile that has shown me so far. Your Dutch accent is actually wonderfully done. I guess I just have quite an ear to still hear the Danish in your voice. Since arriving in Amsterdam, my Danish accent was quite a standout amongst the locals. Over the years that I've been here, I've done my best to perfect a Dutch accent of my own to fit in. I thought it was good enough to fit all the locals. I looked at him suspiciously. I'm from Copenhagen, actually. You do have a fine-tuned ear for accents, I said to him. Sebastian stood up from his laying position and reached a hand down to help me up. I took it, feeling his cool touch send paradoxically warm shivers throughout my body. Will you walk with me? He asked, softly. I nodded in return, getting as close to him as possible. Enjoying the night air with my hand in his, I awaited his next words. I've traveled quite a bit around Europe and America. Business mostly, but I enjoy exploring and learning. I've visited Denmark on a few different occasions, he said. As surprisingly young as Sebastian looked physically, his behavior and experiences sounded like descriptions of someone much older and wiser. I stopped walking and stared at him expectantly. What do you do for your boss? Just an assistant? I asked. Sebastian turned around and paused before replying. Yes, that's about as accurate as it can be described, he said, with a nervous tone. I tried to read his feelings through his eyes, as I felt there was something he was keeping hidden. We had a deal. Tell me what you do. We had a deal. Tell me what you do, he said, excitedly. I took his arm again and continued walking. I'm a student. I came from Denmark to attend Rietveld, I said, rather unenthusiastically. Most people find what I do to be somewhat uninteresting. Sebastian stopped walking and turned to face me with a bright look in his eye. Rietveld? You're an artist? Sebastian asked. I was stunned by the sheer look of amazement on his face that I took an awkward amount of time to reply. Yes, I am. I am a bit unconventional, though. My passion is urban art. I'm a wizard with a can of spray paint, I said, as I tried to hold back from flustering myself with an attempt at humor. Sebastian smiled widely and laughed. That's amazing. I'm a bit of an artist myself, although my wizardry comes in the form of words. I would love to see your work, Sebastian gleefully said as he struggled to contain himself. I pulled my phone from my purse and went to my gallery. Here are a few I've done recently, I said as I handed him my phone. Sebastian's smile grew as he scrolled through each picture, examining them carefully. Suddenly, he stopped scrolling and his smile disappeared. He stared intensely at the phone as I see his eyes flicker, almost if reflecting a passing light. He looked up to me with a worried glance. You were in pain for this one. There was trouble within your family, he said with pained eyes. I grabbed the phone from Sebastian without breaking a stare. How could you know that by just looking at it? I asked, trying not to sound freaked out, but I imagined that I wasn't doing a very good job. Sebastian looked at me apologetically. I'm sorry, it's an artist's intuition. I spent most of my life around paintings, he said with concern. I put my phone back in my purse and grabbed his hand. It's okay. Where are we going? Before Sebastian could reply, he grabbed his own phone from his pocket. He read over the screen with a look of frustration, as if to hold back annoyance. It's my boss. He needs me to check in at Amman, he said with disappointment. Feeling the same disappointment, I looked away from him. Oh, I said, trying to hide my sadness. Sebastian placed his hand under my chin, lifting my head to meet his glowing gaze. Come with me. It won't be long. The club is closed tonight and I need to check in with the keeper. I couldn't help a huge smile from forming while I nodded in agreement. Sebastian and I walked slowly, taking our time as we made our way to the club. Since Amman was closed, there wasn't loud music or glaring spotlights paving our way there. I looked over to Sebastian, whose attention seemed to be divided as he scanned our surroundings with each step we took. He looked down alleyways and car windows everywhere. Are you okay? I asked him. He smiled back to me warmly. Quite all right. Amsterdam at night can be a dangerous place, he replied. I smiled and took his hand as I lay my head on his shoulder while we walked. We reached Amman finally, much to my disappointment, as I was very much enjoying just walking with him. Much less flashy when closed, no? He asked. It really was much less flashy, almost oddly so. Without the lights and people, it just seemed rather dead. I nodded in agreement, and Sebastian led me to the alley. I pulled on his arm to exclaim my excitement. This is where we met. This is where we met, I whispered. Sebastian smiled and planted a kiss on my forehead. If you don't count my awkward approach in the cocktail lounge, he said, holding back a laugh. We reached the back of the alleyway, where a large hidden door with a lovely designed letter E etched on it was sealed with multiple locking mechanisms. I looked up at Sebastian curiously. What does it mean? I asked. What does it mean? I asked. Sebastian's stare didn't break from the door. It stands for Elysium. The true meaning is lost upon this place, unfortunately, he said with a hint of anger in his voice. I am so sorry I have to ask, but would you mind waiting here for just a few minutes? This won't take long. I smiled to him and kissed him on the cheek. No, but hurry back. I replied. Sebastian smiled and put in the combination to 3 different locks before the door opened. He walked in and looked back at me with longing eyes and smiled before closing the door behind him. I was actually glad to get a moment alone to think. As calm as I felt, this has been a night of strange things that I can't seem to explain. First of all, how did I end up walking to the park? The last thing I remembered before being greeted by Sebastian was recording a vlog and working on my newest piece. Sebastian himself is more mystery than I prefer. His job is strange, and he works for someone he seems to refuse to reveal details about. He's surprisingly well versed in language and travel for someone of his age. He was able to discern that I was from Denmark, as if I wasn't trying to hide my accent. I tried to remind myself that, as captivated as I was by Sebastian, that I've only met him last night, and I need time to learn about him. But the craving to learn brought upon a strange fear and doubt about what I don't know. I paced back and forth before leaning against the wall as I tried to sort through my thoughts. Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a shadowy figure walking towards me from the alleyway. The first thing I notice as I stand up is that it wasn't Sebastian. The man walking out of the shadows, revealing himself to be a very thin, twitchy-looking guy. Quite familiar with the drugged-out types here in Amsterdam, I stumble backwards towards the locked door of the club. He stopped under the small spotlight in the alleyway and looked me up and down in examination. He flashed me a wide grin. "The club is closed. Were you looking for fun tonight?" he asked, with a slithering voice that made my skin crawl. "No, I know. I'm actually waiting for someone," I replied as I continued to inch backwards. The man threw me a puzzled stare. "There's no one worth waiting for, my dear. Come with me. You don't need the club to have fun," he said, slithering closer, none like his voice. I could feel myself becoming angry. I've been in quite a few situations in the city where creeps like these don't take no for an answer. "I'm not looking for fun. I said I'm waiting for someone," I said sternly. The wide smirk that he had shifted swiftly into a gaze of anger and grinding teeth. He walked out from the spotlight and towards me, looking angrier and more ravenous with each step. He began reaching out to me. "I paid you the courtesy of asking you nicely, but in all honesty, it wasn't a request," he said, grabbing my arm and pulling me away from the wall. "Get off of me!" I screamed. I threw my knee hard against his groin, which didn't do much beside anger him further. "There's no need for struggle there. You'll be just fine," he said, in between sniffing the air around me. He covered my mouth with his hand to stifle my screams. "Just fine," he said again, with a sarcastic-sounding, reassuring voice. As I closed my eyes to try and stop my tears of frustration and fear, I felt his grasp release from me. His hand no longer covered my mouth, and his tight, painful grip no longer squeezing my arms. I slowly opened my eyes to see Sebastian with his hand around the man's throat, pinning him against the brick wall of the alleyway. The man struggled to no avail. Sebastian, I didn't... He tried to choke out before Sebastian interrupted him. "It doesn't matter what you didn't know. Must I remind you that you are on the grounds of Elysium?" he said, with pure anger and hate in his tone. "Yes, I know, it will not happen again, please," he said, desperately. Why was he pleading? This man was genuinely afraid of Sebastian. Did they know each other? Whatever their words meant, they were beyond my understanding at the moment. "Go, now," Sebastian said, as he released the man from his grip, keeping his gaze on him as he left the alleyway. As soon as the man was out of sight, Sebastian quickly turned to attend me. "I am so sorry, my dear. Did he hurt you?" he asked worriedly as he examined me, noticing my arm had already begun to bruise where the man had grabbed me. "It's just a bruise, I'm fine," I reassured him. Sebastian seemed to not hear me as he continued examining. "He spoke as if he knew you. Do you know him?" I said, lifting his chin so our eyes met. Sebastian looked into my eyes for a few seconds before answering. No, I do not. I am fairly well known around these areas of the city, especially by those who frequent the club, he said, as he looked back to my arm to assess the damage. It's just a bruise, Sebastian. I'm fine, I said, as I continued to try and comfort him. Sebastian helped me up from the ground and pulled me close, wrapping his arms around me tightly. I made the mistake of leaving you alone and you were hurt. I won't fail to protect you again, he said. As much as those words sounded beautiful to me, I couldn't discard the oddity of his tone and how pained he was over a bruise. Sebastian's pain also brought some other obvious questions I've been avoiding. As much as I've been captivated by Sebastian since last night, he's acting as if he loves me, and not just a recent love. It felt like a love that he's had for quite some time. Realizing that this wasn't the right time to bring such questions to his attention, I laid my head against his chest in an attempt to calm him and myself. "Did you finish your errand?" I asked, not moving from his arms. "I did. Shall we go?" I looked up at him and nodded. "Yes, please." "Where are we going?" I asked. Sebastian smiled at me with squinted eyes. "If you like, I can show you where I live. I think we've had enough of the Amsterdam nightlife for tonight." A feeling of excitement washed over me. The excitement has all but shifted entirely to learning about Sebastian. I knew there were things he wasn't telling me, and I intended to find out. "I would very much like that," I replied. Sebastian held out his hand for me to take it. I reached out and placed my hand in his. "I'll keep you close from now, my evening star," he said affectionately. I smiled widely and leaned my head on his shoulder. He did say I was a wizard with words. We walked mostly in silence, to both our enjoyment. I felt almost as if I was being carried, with my head still resting on his shoulder. Sebastian's apartment was not far from the club, and we arrived rather quickly. "Looks fancy," I said, adding a whistle. "Oh, it's nothing special. Peaceful is all I ask for," he replied. I looked at him skeptically. "Peaceful looks extravagant," I exclaimed. Sebastian laughed again and led me to the door, holding it open for me. Sebastian took my hand and led me up the stairs to his apartment. He unlocked the door and let me inside. I stopped just inside the doorway to take a look around. On his walls there were various old-century paintings. They all looked like they originated from different times and different parts of the world. "Wow," I muttered to myself. "You're quite the art fanatic. Where did you get all of these?" I asked. Sebastian took a few seconds to answer, looking around the paintings himself. "They belong to a friend of mine," he said with an odd tone. "Belonged?" I asked curiously. "She's gone. I keep these as mementos," he said. I looked up at him. "I'm sorry, Sebastian." He smiled at me like he always does. "No need for apologies, my dear," he replied, trying to restore happiness to his voice. I reached up and brushed his cheek affectionately. As I was becoming more and more entranced by his comfort, I heard a soft meow coming from just underfoot. A lovely black cat with bright yellow eyes was staring up at me as it glided between my legs in a request for attention. "And this is Emma. Be careful, she's a bit of a—" Sebastian began to say, but as I reached down and picked her up, he became silent. "A bit of a sweetheart?" I squealed in excitement. Sebastian had a strange look of bewilderment on his face. "What the hell? I've never seen her be affectionate before. She actually despises me," he said with confusion. Sebastian tried to reach out to pet Emma, but not before receiving a hiss and swipe in response. Emma bolted from my arms towards her room in the back. "What's that about?" I asked him. Sebastian shrugged. "Couldn't tell you. She hasn't liked me from day one," he said, still sounding confused. I laughed loudly. For some reason, seeing something dislike Sebastian was rather humorous. "Well, what are we going to do?" I asked with a yawn. Sebastian walked me over to his couch, and we both sat down. "You must be tired. Lay here with me for a bit? I'll take you home soon," he said. I nodded as I could feel my eyes getting surprisingly heavy. It hit me only now, finally being able to feel comfortable after an eventful night. Sebastian crept the remote to his TV and began to flip through the channels. "Stop me when you see something you like." I laid my head in his lap and stared at the TV, scanning through the movies as they flashed on the screen. "Oh, right there," I squealed, and squeezed his arm. Sebastian looked down at me. "Twilight? You like this movie?" he asked with a hint of disappointment. "Yes, you may be an expert in mystery and romance, but imagine if you were also a vampire," I said, trying to sound excited, but feeling myself slowly fall asleep. Sebastian looked back to the TV. "Yeah, that would be quite the thing to imagine," he replied. I started drifting closer to sleep by the minute. Sebastian was gliding his fingers seamlessly through my hair. Before falling asleep, I contemplated on how genuine our affection was for each other, even though meeting barely a day ago. It felt as if we had known each other for years. Well, in any case, I hope he wakes me up before long. I remembered that my last project was due at Rietveld early in the morning. Traveling from dream to dream, I enjoyed each one of them, which were quite bright and happy for a change. All of them included Sebastian. At the half-conscious thought of Sebastian, I began stirring from my sleep. I still lay on the couch, but as I reached for Sebastian, he wasn't there. I wake up quickly, feeling frightened. "Sebastian?" I called out. I looked around to see Sebastian on the other side of the room, looking out of his window. "No," I heard him utter. "Sebastian, what's wrong?" I called out to him again. Sebastian whipped around and looked me in the eye with the most pure horror I've ever seen in an expression. "Vesper, come here," he said, as he walked up and took my arm. "Sebastian, what's going on?" I asked, in a demanding voice. He led me to his bedroom and shut the lights off inside. "Stay here. Please don't move or say anything," he pleaded. I looked at him, paralyzed in shock. Suddenly, there was a loud banging on his door. Sebastian closed the door to his bedroom, but left it cracked enough for me to peek outwards. The banging on the door continued as I see him take a few deep breaths. Sebastian then pulled a large, hilted knife, resembling something like a medieval dagger, that was hidden on his belt. I covered my mouth with my hand in horror. What the hell was going on? Sebastian reached to open the door and placed the hand holding the weapon behind his back. I turned my ear towards the door to try and hear what's being said. "What is it?" I heard Sebastian ask. "You know what it is, Sebastian. Don't play stupid. I smell her." A frighteningly deep voice responded. "Smell her? Does he mean me?" I could see Sebastian's grip tightening on his knife. "And why is this a problem? Doesn't sound like it's any concern of yours, Azil," he said angrily. "Sebastian, I don't have time for this. Van Leeuwen expects you first thing tomorrow night," the booming voice replied to him. "Fine, go," Sebastian said, closing the door quickly. He laid the knife down on the table next to him and stood there, frozen. I slowly opened the door to the bedroom and walked out into the doorway, staring at him. Sebastian turned his head to look at me, but still frozen in what looked like fear. "What the hell is this?" I asked sternly. Sebastian turned to walk towards me. I stepped backwards and motioned for him to stay away. "No. First I end up inexplicably in that park. Then I'm attacked outside of a club you work at, and what was that just now? You had a weapon," I said, as I tried to do my best at holding back tears. "Who are you, Sebastian? What do you do, really?" I asked demandingly. Sebastian looked at me with pained eyes. "I wish I could explain everything to you, but I can't right now. Please, you have to trust me," he said, as he seemed hardly able to look me in the eyes. I walked to the couch and grabbed my coat. "You expect me to trust you, but you can't even tell me who you really are?" I asked with a sarcastic laugh. Sebastian was silent. He clearly didn't know what to say. "Until you decide that you can tell me the truth, stay away from me," I said with apparent anger and tears streaming down my face. Before I could see his reaction, I stormed out of the door and slammed it behind me. I started for home quickly. My pace gradually quickened from a walk to a jog. After reaching Amman, the halfway point between my apartment and Sebastian's, I was on a full-on sprint. I could barely pay attention to my surroundings, with the countless thoughts making their rounds through my head. I ignored them. I couldn't deal with what happened tonight without being home and comfortable. I reached my apartment, almost running completely past it and not realizing. I opened the door to my building and rushed up the stairway and opened my door. Much to my annoyance, Alina, Sophie, and Claire were still up, drinking the night away and laughing loudly as they exchanged gossip. "Vesper," they gasped in their usual creepy unison. "Where have you been? Are you okay? You're crying?" Sophie asked worriedly. I pushed her away from giving me a hug. "I'll tell you in the morning," I said with a sob. I turned and headed towards my room. "That's what you said last night," I heard Sophie call out. I ignored her, closed and locked my door behind me, and jumped in my bed in an attempt to get to sleep quickly as possible. Still being exhausted from the night, and especially from what just happened, it didn't take long before I felt myself starting to drift. With the tears still welling up in my eyes, I drift off with one final thought. Who is Sebastian?